Welcome to RESGEN's Giving Life podcast. Stories and conversations about life in Christ, everyday discipleship, and exploring ways that we as men can give life to others. My name is Tom Henderson, founder of RESGEN, and I appreciate you taking some time to join us today. As a quick reminder, we drop a new episode every other Thursday, so if you've missed any of our previous podcasts, I encourage you to check out the archives for more great content. And of course, hit subscribe so you don't miss any future ones. But enough about past or future shows. Let's talk about today's show with my guest, Greg Henson. Greg is a friend, a ministry and leadership mentor of mine, and serves as the president of Sioux Falls Seminary, a position he got when he was only 31 years old. On today's show, Greg and I talk about a lot of good stuff, including how to lead when you are younger than the majority of those that you're leading, building organizations and developing people around gifts, passions, and skills rather than roles, titles, and perceived needs, and how to navigate a big change in a traditional system without losing everyone on board. I know that you're going to be glad that you joined us for the Giving Life podcast today. Here's my conversation with Greg Henson. Well, Greg Henson, it is good to have you on the Giving Life podcast, brother.
Good to be here.
Man, and it's kind of funny because here we are both currently in Sioux Falls Seminary because I office here. The seminary is so gracious in allowing RESGEN, the intergalactic headquarters, to be right here in the seminary with our offices upstairs. You're downstairs in your office as well. And so I think this is probably, it's the way that I think most teens communicate, actually, is more through technology than being in the room together. But it's fun to be able to have you on today.
That's good. It's good to be here. This is good. I'm glad that we're able to do it.
Yeah. Okay. So real quick, just give a quick introduction of who you are. Tell us a little bit about your family, and then we're going to dive right into some, I think, some really cool stuff today.
Yeah. So Greg, obviously is the name here. Moved to Sioux Falls about 7 years ago from Chicago originally. That's kind of where I would have considered home. Married, 4 children, age 12 all the way down to age 3. Kind of, we had our our 2 Chicago kids, and then we've had our 2 Sioux Falls kids with a little bit of a break in the middle.
Yeah.
Grew up as a pastor's kid all my life, and love. You mentioned intergalactic headquarters. Love Sioux Falls as a home base now.
Yeah.
We have students though on about 6 different continents and 30 different countries. So I do get a chance to go a few other places. But yeah, so it's been fun to be here, and it's been fun to kind of mesh my desire for change and kind of organizational leadership stuff with my passion for discipleship, which Sioux Falls Seminary does, I think, a really great job of.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, well, we're going to get into some of that, but I got to start with a very important question. And the reason I'm going to ask this question, Greg, is because growing up with the last name Henderson, I was consistently asked, hey, where's Harry? Because of the movie Harry and the Hendersons, if you remember that. I mean, I know I'm older than you, but there was a movie called Harry and the Hendersons that I grew up with. And they always asked, where's Harry? So I just got to ask you, did anybody ever ask you if you were the brother of Jim Henson, the creator of the Muppets?
So I had a lot of people ask if I was related to Jim Henson.
Okay.
Right? Not so much brother, because he would have been so much older than me.
Sure.
But I did have a lot of people. Now, what made it fun, Tom, is my grandfather on my dad's side, his name is Jim Henson. Right. And so if ever I wanted to have like a little bit of fun with somebody, I'm like, oh yeah, Jim Henson's my granddad. And we kind of run from there. And every once in a while, I could get it going for a little while sometimes. Like, oh, do you know Kermit? It was pretty funny.
Okay, so then, do you have a favorite Muppet then?
I don't know that I have a favorite Muppet. I was about to say Kermit, but it really is. It kind of, my favorite Muppet things have to do with situations. So there are parts of certain Muppet things. So like the animal, I like animal a lot, but in certain small doses.
Right.
Like, I like them all in little bits and pieces, but right. I don't have a favorite. No, sorry.
Okay. Well, I just thought that'd be a fun way to get us started here. So, as I talked about in my intro, I talked about you being one of probably the youngest seminary presidents in the country, especially when you got that position. I'm assuming that was probably, you were one of the youngest presidents ever in like the history of the world.
I don't know about the world, but in the States, I was asked that question so many times. I ended up having to do a lot of research on it and learned that I was not the youngest. From what we can see, I was the second. There was a guy in the mid 40s who was 29.
Okay.
His name was Duke McCall. But at the time, yes, I happened to be the youngest person at the time.
Okay. And so like, what was that like to be put into a position, a significant leadership position of an institution with, and just the title of president alone, at that age? What was that like? Was there, was there some nervousness with that came along with that? Was it just all excitement?
Yeah, I would, if I'm honest, I think it was naive excitement. I think by God's providence, I've had the opportunity to do a whole lot of leadership, even since I was in high school, right? I've done lots of different things. I was a lead pastor of a church while I was in college. And things like that have always kind of been true. And so I think I honestly, when I started, as I looked at the team that was here, the board of trustees, the faculty, the people that were engaged already, I was just excited. I'm like, man, like, Nate Helling. I was like, man, I get to work with Nate. I get to work with Shanda. I get to work with Susan Reese. Like, this is going to be fun. And I think, honestly, my age at the time probably didn't have enough experience to be worried about anything. Like, I was like, oh, this is just going to be fun. So it was probably naive excitement. But also my wife and I just felt, we felt so called to be here. It was very clear. I didn't even know Sioux Falls existed, right? When I got a call from the search committee, like, where is Sioux Falls? And so, but over time found, oh man, this is what I think God has in store for us. So yeah, just excitement, honestly.
Right.
Excitement.
So I remember when I was a youth pastor in Portland, Oregon, when I got that position, I was 23 years old. And I remember certain instances where I was talking with my lead pastor and talking about how my age sometimes seemed to be something that was almost a hindrance to people following me, because like I wasn't really that much older than some of the teenagers that I was leading, that I was taking on mission trips, that I was teaching on a regular basis and so forth. And then of course I was much younger than the parents that I was also in charge of ministering to and caring for and all of that. In fact, I remember one situation, I was trying to parallel park a 15-passenger van with a trailer on Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco, which parallel parking a trailer is a nightmare anyway, let alone on like a busy street in San Francisco. And I was up on the curb and I was asking everybody, because this is what like adult dudes do, is we're like, hey, I need you to be quiet because I got to focus. You're turning down the radio and all this kind of thing. And one of the teens said, you guys be quiet. Tom knows what he's doing. He's older than us. And then another teen said, not by much, So as you came into the environment of especially the graduate education system that is seminary, what were some of the key, tools or things that you brought with you that allowed you to lead up and lead a lot of individuals that were older than you and instill trust in them, that they could trust where you're going to be taking them and the seminary?
In short answer to that question is, I think I brought mentors and questions. So rather than bringing answers, rather than bringing, right away with this is what it's going to be, this is how it's going to be, I tried to bring questions. I tried to bring, help me understand why we do this. Now, I'm not going to lie, right? I had ideas.
Sure.
It's like, well, I think this is maybe the direction we're going to go in. But the questions of engaging in conversation and being in community and being humble enough to say, let's just map this out. So why do we do this way? What I found, at least in that process, now I think my position of president, I don't want to be naive, gave me the opportunity to convene those conversations, which would not necessarily be the case if I didn't have that title, right? Mm-hmm. So I think I was able to convene those conversations, but really by just continually asking why, I think that really helped a lot, because then the community could see, oh, why do we allow the credit hour to govern every single aspect of our lives, not just education? Why do we do these different things? And that was helpful. And then the other is mentors. I have my whole life tried really hard to identify people with whatever sphere I might be in. So when I was serving as a pastor, it was other pastors. When I was serving for the Boy Scouts as an executive in the Chicago area, other people doing the same thing, right? So trying to find people to speak into my life as a mentor is really helpful, because it gave me another place to ask questions. So I could talk here, but I could also then go to somebody else and say, well, how does this question get answered across the industry as a whole, right? I don't know how theological education works in, in some place in Canada. Like I need to learn from people there. So mentors and questions, I think, is the biggest thing. But again, it's trying to have that idea, that vision, which I think you need as a leader, but to do it alongside of people rather than kind of beating them over the head with a vision.
Right. Well, and we're going to revisit some of that, especially because you have really helped this seminary, and now even bringing some new thinking into the undergraduate education system, and really shifting and kind of navigating through some pretty significant changes. And so we're gonna come back to that in how that kind of transpired. But one of the things that I think that you've been really good at, and this is where it's been even in your mentoring of me, because as I talked about even in the intro, that you and I got connected, obviously, just because of I was already officing here actually when you came on board, and then this whole new idea of the Kairos Project came about, and I was in the first class of 15 individuals. We were nicely called the guinea pigs of the program, and that we were allowed to speak into it. And then you actually became my mentor after my faculty advisor had stepped down to retire. And so we got really connected at a personal level as well as the educational level. And I know that you've been very passionate about helping people really build you called it a sustainable rhythm of life. As opposed to, a lot of times when we think about our lives and work and how do we establish this life-work balance, which is very difficult in our day today because of it's very difficult to disconnect really from anything. So share a little bit about just kind of your viewpoint and your passion for building sustainable rhythms of life. What does that mean? How do we do that? How does that work?
Yeah, and maybe to just keep going on that. The idea is to move toward sustainable rhythms of life, right? I don't want to say that I have all of the answers or that I'm even there, right? But it's maybe a different directional focus, which I have to obviously own the fact that I have a role that is it's a very information centric kind of role. I don't work on an assembly line. The role that I have allows certain things to be true. But in the world that we often find the students of the seminary, the faculty, the staff, it's trying to help us realize that life is often not as compartmentalized as we like to think it is. Even if we try, right? Even if I leave my, I have a phone. I know people who have a cell phone for work and a cell phone for home. And I leave my laptop at work and I don't bring it home. And that's all fine. I'm not saying any of that is bad, but we've tried to compartmentalize some of those things. And I think that, and at least in my experience, the challenge when we try to compartmentalize too much is we're kind of pushing against at least what culture and what our lives are actually like, right? So when you were a student, I'll just use you an example, and you can feel free to tell me I'm wrong here, Tom.
Yeah.
Right, you've got family, you have your job, RESGEN,
Mm-hmm.
You've got the relationships that exist within the community that are connected to your job or your family. You are involved in your church, right? So you've got kind of that part of your ministry, and then you have seminary stuff. And historically, we're like, well, we got to make time for this, and I got to do this, and I got to balance. And what maybe I'm trying to say is, what if we see it as a collective whole, that God is inviting us to do, to chase after what He's doing in the world, right? To basically be followers of Jesus and flourish in our vocations. And there's not really this clear line of demarcation among those things. So if I'm going to develop as a follower of Jesus who flourishes in my vocation, then I'm probably thinking about how seminary impacts what I do on a daily basis, whether it's with RESGEN or as a financial planner or as a surgeon or as a real estate agent or whatever. And so it's trying to get this fully orbed understanding of what it means to be a human, right? Developing as humans it's not a linear process, and our lives, the work week is usually not a linear process. And so a sustainable rhythm of life is trying to recognize that so much of what we do is integrated. The way we think about God, the way we think about our jobs, the way we think about life in general are super interconnected. So instead of thinking, well, I've got 40 hours, as if that's some magic arbitrary number, right? My work week is 40 hours. Like, why does it have to be 40? Maybe it should be 20. Maybe it should be 60. Like, I don't know. That's going to be different for different people in different contexts. But instead of thinking about hours, could we think about, well, God invites us into this rhythm of rest, work, Sabbath, and engagement in his mission. And so how do we engage in that process? And you see the little loopy thing is because that's what you do, right? It's you work from rest, and that's just kind of an ongoing rhythm, right? And work might literally be your job, but it might also be parenting. If you've got kids, I've got kids. It's not an easy task to parent, and so why do we define work as the thing that we get paid for when work is the thing that maybe we are invited by God to do? Whatever that may mean. So if we're stewarding all of the opportunities and all of the situations in our life, then we might want to think about that in a sustainable fashion. So instead of I work like a dog for 40 hours a week so that I can rest on the weekend, well, what if I developed rhythms of work that allowed me to be more sustained for a longer period of time? And it really, in the educational world, where that comes is, I think the way that the educational world has historically thought of the concept of sabbatical. So it's very common for a faculty member or staff or whoever to work for a period of years and then get a year as a sabbatical. But the issue is that assumes that during the 7 years that you're working like crazy. You need that year sabbatical because there's no time in the other 7. Like, well, what if we didn't do that? What if we could just have a rhythm that was sustainable? So that's what we're trying to do with our policies for the way that office hours work, for the way we think about staff meetings, for the way we think about like it works really well if you're not governed by credit hours, which Kairos isn't. You can have a much more sustainable rhythm if I don't have to worry about how many hours are tied to something. So it's trying to integrate all of that into Sabbath, and rest should be just a natural part of what we're doing. And so how do you build that rhythm? Maybe it's just inviting different questions. So instead of how do I balance, it's how do I look at the whole and have a sustainable rhythm? Does that make any sense, or am I speaking gibberish, Tom?
Well, no, I think that it does. So then the question is, how do we get there? So how do we, is it just a change of thinking at an individual level in addition to an organizational level? Or because I think we would all say, boy, we would love to have a sustainable rhythm of life. I mean, it sounds fantastic. It sounds just amazing. Like, well, number one, I like just rhythm means that I'm kind of moving in a direction, and it is circular probably, and one thing leads to the next. And then of course we want to be able to sustain it because we don't want to just all of a sudden like just drop and be like, oh my gosh, I can't take this anymore, which is interesting. You bring up sabbaticals, and you and I both have known people that go away, whether you're a professor or pastor or what have you, and you go away for a sabbatical, and then it's somehow during that time that all of a sudden God speaks to them and says, you should no longer be at that church, or no longer, you end up like leaving. And so maybe it's when they finally took that time to rest, they realized, man, I don't know if I can go back into that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
which is problematic, right? That's a
totally
problem. Like if you've created a system that's destroying people, that maybe that's a problem. So the how is a great question, Tom. There are a couple things I invite people to do. One, it usually comes back to questions. One is trying to kind of embrace the 80% rule, like this idea that getting a project or getting work or getting something to the point of 80% good, and then the amount of time and effort it takes to get it to 80% is actually a whole lot less than the time and energy it takes to get from 80 to 100. And so it's not that we have to do like bad work. It's that recognizing the value proposition between 80 and 100% is mainly only realized on a handful of things. So for some people, myself included, who are very high, like if you know the DISC profile, I'm a high D and a high C, which means everything has to be done now and perfect, right? And so for me, it's kind of lowering that expectation of perfect might not be the goal. In some cases it is, but maybe not in every case. And so inviting that conversation has been a helpful thing, is to realize, am I putting a burden on myself that's not actually there? Is there somebody that is putting that burden on me? Then I need to probably deal with that. But if it's myself, that's easier to deal with. So that's one. Another one is, I think it's Dallas Willard. I'm not Philip Thompson, so I'm not going to be able to quote name and chapter and verse here. But
which Philip Thompson's a professor here at Sioux Falls Seminary that literally he knows what year it's published, who published it, all that kind of stuff. So that's what Greg's referring to there.
It's on,
yeah,
everything.
exactly.
But I think he talks about the process of ruthlessly eliminating hurry, and this idea of how do we develop our lives so that we're just not hurried. It's not that we're not trying to get things done or that we're not ambitious, but that hurry piece, which is honestly, that's the one I have to struggle with the most personally, because I like giving my 3-year-old plenty of time to zip her coat is a challenge.
Oh my gosh, I'm with you.
Just let me do it. I'll do it when we go, right? So that one is a big one for me personally. And then the third one is probably conversations about what has to be done, and that's probably the organizational one. We are shaped and formed not only by our daily practices as individuals, but organizational practices shape and form us. So the way we think about meetings, the things we name meetings, the reports that we create, the messages that we send in emails, all of those things shape and form the people that are part of that organization. And so as an organization, we have to ask, what are we actually trying to shape and form in people? And if we're trying to shape and form people who are stressed out about reports, well, then we might do one thing. But if we're trying to shape and form people who are focused on maybe one handful of things, that can tend to remove from the equation other things. And the last one, then Nate would probably want me to say this one, is simplicity. The more simplified your way of being is, the easier it is to have a sustainable rhythm. So right. Yeah, those are the four I think that we try to work toward. Which
as I think Americans and in our culture as a whole, we don't do a great job of simplifying. A lot of times we overcomplicate things, and we add more things to the schedule. We add more things to our budget, whether or not we can afford them or not. I mean, we continue to add more and more and more, and then at some point, we just can't. I mean, it's like going to a buffet and you just keep, one more plate. I can get one more plate because I want to make sure I get the best value for my dollar, like at the Pizza Ranch or whatever. But is that really good for you? Probably
or one more activity, or one more meeting, or one more paper, or one more email, or one more let's just not.
Right.
Which is so much easier said than done.
Totally.
But if I don't do that, what then happens? And maybe what I'm trying to say is, well, let's find out. Let's not do that and find out if it creates a problem, rather than trying to solve the problem before it's actually a problem.
Yeah, and I love what you talked about on the perfectionism gene that I think you and I both have. That it's just, you want things done right, you want them done well, you want them done now. And one of the things is that obviously greatly impacts us, but it also causes us to look at our people or look at our kids or whatever, and not even meaning to, but we can project that on them. And I remember having conversations with my boys. I mean, I've got one that's a freshman in college and one that's a sophomore now in high school, and there'd be times where they would say, "Dad, it seems like you just expect perfection out of me." And I really had to think about, boy, what am I sharing with them that is, or what are they seeing in me that is causing them to feel that way? And say, you know what, I'm sorry for that, and I don't, but I do want it done right. I mean, it's that balance of how do you say, well, let's pursue.
I'm sorry, but you got to actually do it right.
Yeah, how do we pursue excellence? And that's a wrestling match that I have with myself, and I think that probably a lot of our listeners and viewers do too. Is how do we pursue excellence but not get caught up in where it becomes this unbearable weight that then, I mean, that is robbing us of a sustainable life and rhythm for sure.
Well, that's actually a great tie-in, Tom, to Kairos, because one of the things that I've learned as we've been engaging in this Kairos project for the better part of a decade now.
Which, before you go further on that, Greg, let's explain that a little bit, just the Kairos project, because we haven't done that. And so, and this is what I eventually wanted to get back to anyway, was when you came, the seminary, as well as, I mean, the vast majority of graduate programs in seminaries across the country, were your traditional model, right? You come to class, you sit. I sat in a classroom under several professors, and you take notes, you write papers, and that's good. And then you came with this idea of the Kairos Project that was much more contextualized learning of saying, hey, how can your current work, regardless of what that is, like you mentioned, surgery, real estate, or ministry, construction work, or whatever, how can we build a graduate program where that is available to anybody to be a lifelong learner, to pursue that degree, even if they can't come to class, which was one of my biggest issues, because I was traveling a ton and speaking, and I just couldn't make it to class. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure I really wanted to go to class, Greg, to be honest with you. But so you came with this idea of the Kairos program and project. So then, and so now that there's kind of this, explain that just a little bit more. And then I want to talk about how you really steered that ship. I mean, because the seminary was a pretty big ship, and you had to shift some things, you had to change some things, and not lose people in the process. So there was a lot there, but so talk about what's on the Kairos project stuff, and then let's get into that other piece.
Yeah. So the Kairos project, try to short thing is basically switching from an input-based approach to learning to an outcome-based approach. So historically, at least modern higher education is built around what I often call a pyramid of courses, which is we construct degree programs like it's a pyramid, and there's some courses you go through at the beginning, and then some other ones until you pass every course, and then you get your degree. And it's built upon this idea that learning, or most people would use the word knowledge, incorrectly use the word knowledge, that this is this building process, right? And that if everybody goes through that process, they'll get to the same endpoint, which is not a bad thing. Like that, when it was created, was a great thing. But it kind of assumed that everybody was the same person, right? So when Sioux Falls Seminary was founded 165 years ago in New York, honestly, every student who was enrolled, it was called, it was a German Baptist seminary. I don't even remember the full name of it, but it was in Rochester, New York. Honestly, every student who enrolled was a young, white, German-speaking pastor, or a person who was going to be a pastor of a German Baptist church somewhere in New York, right? So it's like every single student was the same coming in, going to be the same situation when they left. And so honestly, that kind of pyramid made a lot of sense because it was normalized people and context. But now fast forward 165 years, that's not. You have Tom Henderson, and you have all these other people who are doing lots of different things and coming in at different places. And so trying to say, it's not that the input doesn't matter, that, the learning process doesn't matter. It's that what we actually need to measure are the outcomes. Mm-hmm. So how do we measure and demonstrate learning, not just how do we put people in classes? So classes can be helpful ways to learn, but you have to think of them as a tool that people can use to develop mastery, not as the thing that develops mastery, right? So Tom, you can have lots of different things that you do that develop mastery of leadership skills, or mastery of leadership character, or mastery of the content related to leadership. A course is one of those things. Mm-hmm. So with Kairos, we're just trying to move from courses being the foundational building block to demonstrated learning, or what we would say demonstrated mastery of content, character, and craft. And when you do that, you kind of disconnect the credit hour in the course from the learning, which is what creates the flexibility, right? Mm-hmm. So you can have people engage in courses if they want to, or people engage in project-based situational contextual learning. Both work. So that was a shift for Sioux Falls Seminary and shift for graduate theological education in the United States. It's not actually new. So that's the thing that some people miss is the earliest shift to outcome-based education as a way of thinking was in the 1950s and 60s. And then that turned into like competency-based education in like the 1970s. That was like an offspring of outcome-based. And then you start having lots of different models developed between the 70s and today. What we did at Sioux Falls was to say, well, what if we take some of the best of kind of the British tutor model and some of the best of the medical model and some of the best of this outcome-based stuff and put it all together in light of the fact that discipleship is a relational journey. So at its core, how do you develop followers of Jesus and then have the byproduct be the degree? So rather than starting with, I need to get Tom Henderson a master's degree in leadership, to how do I help Tom get to where God is calling him to be as a follower of Jesus? Mm-hmm. And oh, by the way, earn a master's degree in the process. That was the big shift for us, was to center it back around Jesus instead of around the academy, and not lose the academy in the process, but say, this should flow from the person and work of Jesus Christ first, and then move into the rest. So that was the biggest shift, is changing the voices that were at the table, if you will. So historically in the academy, educational programs are designed by a particular set of people. There's a particular set of voices that get to be at the table to do that. And so what we were saying is we still want those voices, but we also want local pastors and denominational leaders and mentors and other people at that same table. And so what we've had to do is develop a process by which a group of people can work with individual students to customize an educational journey. Mm-hmm. That power shift is probably the biggest one that we've had to navigate. Now, what you asked, how do you take a ship like Sioux Falls and to move it in that direction?
Yeah, because I'm sure we have some people that are trying to make some changes in their companies. Even in our homes, sometimes it's tough to change the way that we feel like we need to go. So how are you successful in doing that without leaving carnage everywhere? Because like when you talk about changing a very traditional model, you got to enter those discussions with a lot of listening and questions and all of that, but also with a lot of grace and caring for individuals as well, because change is hard.
Yeah. Well, and what you're doing in that kind of change, a paradigmatic change, you are inviting people to reconsider their identity, right? You are, in our case, you're inviting a staff member or a senior level administrator to reconsider their identity, not as this person that sits up here is in charge, but this person who sits down here and walking with everybody else. So you have to be a strategic thinker, but also, like, I'm the IT help desk. So when someone emails us a problem with our learning management, I'm the guy that is the email support for that, right? So it's this, how do you help administrators see that you don't get to sit up here? You've got to be, that's an identity shift for a lot of people. How do you help faculty realize that they have value as experts in a particular field, but that's not their primary value? Their primary value is that they know how to become experts. So it's their integrative expertise that has immense levels of value. That's a huge identity shift. So I think what you have to do, at least what we've done, is pretty much what you just said, is enter into those conversations with an immense amount of grace and humility, with questions being your guide. So what we've tried to do, and again, I was blessed, God's providence, the people here were some of the most amazing faculty, board members, staff members in the world of theological education. And so that was that was awesome. Yeah. It still is, right? But we spent probably the first 6 months simply getting to a collective shared understanding of reality. So often, at least in nonprofits, especially in the world of education and seminaries, we tend to have a picture of financial reality, enrollment reality, marketing reality, lots of different things that are not the same. So, the staff might think this, the faculty might think this, the board might think this. Or if you're in a nonprofit or a business, your CEO might think this, your CFO might think something else, and your customers might think something different. But getting to a shared understanding of what's actually going on, we spent 6 months doing that, where we talked about what's the actual data. We looked backwards for 10 years. So we said, we can always attest to the fact that God is at work, but you only actually know that when you look backwards, right? So we looked at 10 years of data and said, what does God actually provide on a consistent basis during that 10 period? Turns out is about $1 million less financially than we tended to plan for as a seminary. Maybe we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Maybe stewardship is about what you have, not what you don't. And maybe we should realize that God's given us everything he needs to do. He needs to give us in order to do the things that he's calling us to do. So once we got that shared understanding of reality, then the questions that you ask can be answered from that common understanding. So we could begin to ask questions about learning management and who gets to decide what goes in a curriculum and what Tom Henderson has to do as a student. We can ask those questions, but from a common foundation. And I think that's probably the two things that we did. A lot of grace, a lot of humility, shared understanding, and then questions that use that as the foundation.
So so two words come to mind as I hear you talk. And the first one is patience, because when you talked about it is a 6-month conversation, which you just said a few minutes ago, probably 10, 15 minutes ago now, is you like to get things done now and you want them done perfect, right? And so that was a real test of your patience as a leader. And I think that leadership in general, really a lot of it does come down to our patience. And then the second thing is our ability to communicate and keeping that open communication, both on the listening end as well as the weighing in end. And so that's where I hear you saying, spending a lot of time on the communication and on the patience end, and allowing the team to journey with you and not getting so far, because you could see where you wanted to go. And I think that's, as a leader, that's the hardest part, right? Is where we can see where, like, this is where it's going to be. Maybe not like full understanding, but we can say, this is where we want to get to and where I can envision it in my head. But we got to make sure we don't leave people, just floundering behind us. And so that was something that, maybe a mentor taught you that, and through the process as well, but that evidently you did a good job of that, because it didn't leave carnage behind you.
It didn't seem to, for sure. And we did have to make changes, right? So we did, when you're spending $1 million more than you're supposed to in a given year, obviously there are some staff changes, but, and things like that did have to happen. So I don't want to, it's not like there was no change. But I think to go along with that communication is transparency, right? Is just kind of owning things, like to say,
it's good.
We're not going to hide the financial picture. We're not going to hide. There were people who, when we went through that 6 months, realized that the actual financial picture of the seminary at the time, had no clue, had no idea that maybe we needed to think about some of these things. And it's not their fault, right?
Sure.
We have to be, as organizations, intentionally trained. And again, I don't want to say that Sioux Falls was trying to hide things. Like, the seminary wasn't trying to hide things from people, but we have to be so intentional about being transparent. We have to be so intentional about making sure that nothing is behind the scenes, if you will, which doesn't tend to be in our best interest as leaders. But if everybody has all the information, why do they need me? Your job isn't to control the information.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. And that transparency, I think we talked about, just even as a leader, regardless of age, transparency will usually lead to trust. And saying that I can trust Greg, I can trust the leadership that's in place of this company, or if I'm transparent as a leader, then it shows my people that they can trust me. which is so good. Okay, so I want to shift gears here real quick, because one of the things that I know that you've talked with me about, and thought it'd be good for us to talk about here, is the developing of people and your staff around things like their gifts, their passions, and their skills, rather than like a title or their job description or what you call like their specific needs. So what does that look like, and how does an organization maybe that's more focused on job descriptions, how do they start making a shift into developing their people and in the gifts, passions, and all that?
Yeah. So, I mean, in our industry, roles, titles, things like that they're steeped in tradition. Like every school has a registrar, every school has a this, every school has a that. And even some of them are written into the regulations that the government has, right? They're like, I have no option. I have to have somebody with the title CFO.
Yeah.
If I don't, I cannot be accredited as a graduate school, right? So there are things like that exist in our industry.
Sure.
But what we've tried to do from the very beginning, and this is part of the change process, is once you have that kind of common understanding, you can begin to have a common understanding of what are the tasks that we actually have to accomplish. Instead of what are the people that we need, or what are the titles that I need a sales manager, or I need a this, or I need a that. Like, let's focus on this common understanding and then the actual tasks that are related to that. And what we did is try to put those tasks on literally write out the tasks on a whiteboard. Now we were blessed; we're a small business, right? We're not a big company, but if you write all those things down, you can begin to categorize them and say, oh, these are all kind of like detail-oriented tasks. They might have nothing to do with each other, right? Some might be related to student services, some might be related to gift processing, some might be related, like in a traditional system, those are all different people. You have a this person and that. But what if I really just need somebody who's good with details? Like I don't need a different title for all of those things. And so starting to think about who do we have that's wonderful with details and would wake up in the day excited to do detail stuff, right? And what you end up doing, at least in our case, is titles really just become names, right? So we all have titles, right? My title is president, and Nate Helling's title is something. I think his title is CFO.
Yeah.
But you get to the point where, like, when someone asks for Nate, like his answer should be, my title is Nate Helling. Like, what does that mean? Well, I do the things Nate Helling does. My title is Shanda Strickerts. I do the things that Shanda Strickerts does. My name is Susan Reese. I do the things that Susan Reese does. My name is Greg. I do the things that Greg does. And so that frees an organization to focus on developing people to flourish in their gifting, rather than trying to fill positions. Like, oh, I really need to fill X, Y, or Z. I'm like, maybe not. Maybe the answer isn't that you need more people. Maybe the answer is you need to stop doing something you thought you were going to need to do, or whatever. But it allows you to focus on people development rather than position fulfillment. Now, every once in a while, you do need, like, one of our schools that we run is in Myerstown, Pennsylvania. Our campus there, we've got a giant building. It's called Christ Hall. Wonderful name for a school's building. But it's somebody who knows how to fix pipes is going to have to be we're going to have a maintenance guy, right?
Sure.
And we're going to fill that kind of a position. And so those do exist, but the mindset is trying to shift toward not filling roles, but developing people. And we get so caught up, and we were taught this, right? In business, I have an MBA. When you go through those processes, you need to have clear HR processes and clear job descriptions, and people need to know what they're held accountable. Yes, people need to know what they're held accountable to and how they're being evaluated. But that doesn't mean that we have to use job descriptions the way we have historically used them. We can maybe be liberated and think differently about, maybe a job description is walking alongside people like I did as your mentor, is walking with them and helping them develop into what God is calling them to be, which may not even be at your business. Maybe where God is calling them to be is someplace else, which is not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so we're about out of time, and I want to talk a little bit. You mentioned the words, two words earlier: rest and Sabbath. Those are things that you and I know we don't do super well because we're very driven. We're constantly we're moving forward. We're always moving. We're always moving and getting things done and all that. And so, what I wanted to ask you is, so for people that that struggle in that area. What are some things that maybe you personally are trying to do so that you can rest? Obviously, with the season that we're in, with COVID, and we're recording this podcast here in October. It's not going to probably be until for another 6 to 8 weeks or something like that. But COVID's not going away. I mean, we're going to continue to just be figuring this thing out. So I know that our travel schedules has gone by the wayside. You haven't traveled since like February, you said, and I haven't really either. And so there's obviously some rest that can happen because we're not traveling, but yet that doesn't always mean that our mind is at rest. So how are you able to rest, and what kind of encouragement would you give to guys that maybe just really struggle in that whole just being still?
Yeah. I'm going to let you in on a little secret here. I think being still and solitude and silence is a great way to rest. It's definitely a spiritual discipline. I don't know that it's the only way to rest.
Yeah.
And so my answer to your question is I tend to pay a lot of attention to my energy levels. And so that doesn't have anything to do with my drive. It doesn't have anything to do with what I am focusing on or thinking about or whatever. I try to pay a lot of attention to my energy levels. So if I am just tired, right? If I notice that my energy is not where I would want it to be, or it doesn't mean that I'm gonna I enjoy thinking about the stuff that God is doing in and through Sioux Falls Seminary. So I might go for a walk and still think about my job, but I'm not going to sit down and write something that I need to write. I'm not going to what will give me energy or give me rest is consciously saying no to something that I know I probably quote unquote should do right now, but I'm just not, right? So I'm like, all right, I know that here's a great example. We do a blog post on our website every single week. Okay. And the next series of weeks, they're all supposed to be written by me. And I have had one that's going to be due to Shanda for a while now. And I wrote it this morning because my energy level was where it needed to be this morning, which meant I had to manage expectations with Shanda. And we've kind of developed that culture. Like Shanda knows, she trusts me that it's going to get there when it needs to get there. But my energy was never where it needed to be to do that task. So rest, I don't think needs to be detachment from thinking about your job or detachment from thinking about your family. It can mean those things, yep, but it doesn't have to mean those things. For me, it's more about how do I pay attention to my energy level. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of what I do. And that's what I'm trying to live into with my family and trying to get better at every day. Yeah. I'm not saying I'm there, but
no, that's good. I'm glad you said that. I didn't have a specific direction that I was hoping it'd go, but I'm excited to hear that you say that, because I remember even the first time I went away, I said, look, I'm going to go and I need to just get away. I just need to rest or whatever. And so I went away for a week, and I'm like, well, I should just read the whole time. Or I should just, whatever. Because I just, like in my head, that's what I thought I should do, right? But then I got there and I'm like, this is horrible. Like this is actually giving me more anxiety and more stress than I'm supposed to rest. I'm supposed to rest. Right. So it's almost figuring out just how do you rest well, and how what does feed your spirit. And for some that might be reading. For some it might be going hiking. For some it might be going we live in South Dakota, hunting or whatever. Like what gives you that rest that you need? And like me, I'm always thinking about RESGEN stuff. And there are times when I need to unplug, but I'm energized by it. And so and oftentimes I think that we can feel guilty about that.
Yeah.
That, well,
I think you're right. We can. And now the caveat to that is, and this is true for you and me, and then obviously true for other people, we are not lone rangers, right? So we have a family, we have a spouse, we have kids. We should so being attentive to our energy levels is great. Being the fact that I love thinking about Kairos, you love thinking about RESGEN, that's all great. But we probably also need to be attentive to what our spouses and kids are saying. Yeah, that's fine, but you haven't talked to me about anything other than RESGEN for 4 weeks. We have to also be attentive to that. So
yes,
we can't just like live in our own world. We have to. So I might love to think about something for 20 hours a day, but that doesn't mean my wife does.
Right. And you know what? She probably doesn't. So that's probably true. So, okay. All right. So 2 more questions, then we're done. I know you're a lifelong learner. What's God teaching you right now, Greg?
I think what we were just talking about are the things that God is teaching me is how to engage in that sustainable rhythm and how to do so in community with my own family. So how to be who I am, but to do that in a way that is honoring and all, like how to do that well. I think this season has given an opportunity to reimagine that in new ways. Because I used to be half of each month I was gone. That's just not the case anymore. And so how I use that time, that's part of what I'm starting to realize. And then the other thing is, as we've gotten farther and deeper into doing Kairos, I think God is teaching us even more and deeper ways to reimagine what human development is and discipleship, and how they're really not that different. So those are probably the 2 things I'm spending most of my time on.
Yeah, and how valuable for all of us, especially as guys, to say, okay, how are we making sure that we are, moving as if we're married with our spouses, if we have kids, as a family. And I think that you're right. This time has afforded. It has definitely brought some stresses and some challenges to relationships, I know, across the country and financial and health and all those. But if there's anything good that has come out of it, hopefully it has been where people are thinking, boy, you know what? My schedule isn't as full, and it's okay. And I've had more family dinners, and I've had game nights, and I don't know how many puzzles we put together, especially the first month. And then we're like, we don't want to look at another puzzle, especially when they were going for like $300 on Amazon, because there's this puzzle shortage. But all right. Well, at the end of every show, Greg, I'd love to just give our guests 30 to 60 seconds and what we just call the final word. Okay. So where you can just encourage the listeners, viewers, in whatever way that you feel the Lord is calling you to encourage them. So Greg, what is your final word for our listeners today?
I think mine would be to take a few moments and even maybe write down, who are the people that are speaking into my life right now, and how am I being intentional about letting them do that? How am I intentionally inviting other people to speak into what God is doing, or maybe inviting me to do? I think all the stuff that we've talked about, rhythm of life, leadership, change, family, all of that stuff, at the core of all of that is relationships. And following Jesus is a relational journey. So who is it that's on that journey with you? And how are you being intentional about it?
Yeah. Which is so good. I know that that's obviously one of the biggest strengths of the Kairos Project, and I'm a graduate of the program, and where we had those mentors, those people that were in our personal mentor, our faculty mentor, and then our ministry mentor, and that they could speak into your lives in the different aspects, and that you gave them permission to kind of just speak into every area and so that's so valuable. So that's a great word to end with. Well, brother, I appreciate your time. It's always good to be with you, whether it's virtual or in person. So blessings on you as you continue to move through the remainder of this year and lead the seminary and everything else that you're doing. So just thanks for your friendship and your heart, and thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
All right. See you, Greg. Thank you for joining us for my conversation with Greg Henson on the Giving Life podcast today. If you want to follow up with Greg or learn more about the Kairos Project, be sure to visit sfseminary.edu. As always, if you think today's content on leadership would be helpful with others, please share it with them. And of course, don't forget to hit up RESGEN.org to find out more information about the RESGEN Men's Summit, which takes place on January 30th, and RESGEN's marriage event, Date Night Comedy, which takes place the 2 nights prior. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time on RESGEN's Giving Life podcast. Until then, continue being men whose life in Christ gives life to others.